The morning sun cast long shadows across the military base as Sergeant Maria Rodriguez made her way slowly toward the medical facility. Her left leg dragged slightly with each step, a reminder of the IED explosion that had changed everything 3 months ago in Afghanistan. The metal fragments still embedded near her knee made walking painful, but Maria refused to use the wheelchair the doctors had recommended. She was a Marine, and Marines walked on their own 2 feet. Her dress blue uniform hung perfectly pressed despite the early hour. Today marked her first public appearance since returning stateside, and she wanted to represent her unit with pride. The Purple Heart pinned to her chest caught the sunlight as she paused to catch her breath, leaning against a concrete barrier. The pain shot through her leg like lightning, but she gritted her teeth and continued forward. The base was already bustling with activity. Marines jogged past in formation, their synchronized footsteps echoing across the asphalt. Maria remembered when she used to lead those morning runs, pushing her platoon to be stronger and faster. Now, even this short walk to the ceremony felt like climbing a mountain. But she had promises to keep and a speech to give to the new recruits about sacrifice and service. As she approached the main thoroughfare that connected the different sections of the base, Maria noticed a group of Navy SEALs gathered near the entrance to the Officers Club. She recognized them by their distinctive uniform and the confident way they carried themselves. SEALs had a reputation for being elite warriors, and these men certainly looked the part. They were laughing about something, their voices carrying across the morning air. Maria didn't think much of it as she continued her painful journey. She was focused on putting one foot in front of the other, managing the throbbing in her leg while maintaining the military bearing that had been drilled into her since boot camp. The ceremony wasn't for another hour, but she needed extra time to get there, and she wanted to review her notes one final time. The SEALs' conversation grew louder as she approached. She caught fragments of their discussion about an upcoming training exercise and something about proving their superiority over other branches. Military inter-service rivalry was nothing new, and Maria had participated in her share of good-natured competition between Marines and Navy personnel. It was usually harmless banter that actually helped build camaraderie. But, as Maria drew closer, their tone shifted. One of the SEALs, a tall man with sandy blonde hair and lieutenant bars on his collar, noticed her approach. His eyes immediately went to her obvious limp, and a smirk crossed his face. He nudged his companion, a stocky SEAL with sergeant stripes, and whispered something that made the others chuckle. "Hey, look what we have here," the lieutenant called out, his voice carrying a mocking edge. "Looks like the Marines are sending their wounded to do public relations now." Maria's jaw tightened, but she kept walking. She had dealt with ignorant comments before, both about being a woman in combat and about her injuries. Usually, she let such remarks slide off her back, but something about the lieutenant's tone made her stomach clench with anger. "I don't think she heard you, LT," the sergeant said loudly enough for Maria to clearly hear. Maybe her ears got damaged along with her legs. The group erupted in laughter, and Maria felt her face flush with humiliation and rage. She stopped walking and turned to face them, her hands clenching into fists at her sides. Every instinct told her to march over there and show them exactly what this wounded Marine was capable of, but her training held her back. Creating a scene would only reflect poorly on her unit and give these men exactly what they seemed to want. "Something wrong with your hearing, Marine?" the lieutenant called out again. "Or are you just too slow to keep up with a normal conversation?" Maria's chest rose and fell with controlled breathing as she fought to maintain her composure. The pain in her leg seemed to intensify, as if her body was responding to the emotional assault. She could feel the eyes of other personnel on the base turning their way, drawn by the commotion. Some looked sympathetic, others appeared uncomfortable with the situation, but no one stepped forward to intervene. "At least when Marines get hurt, they get to go home and play dress up," another SEAL added, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Must be nice to have such an easy job after getting a little scratch overseas." The words hit Maria like physical blows. A little scratch. The explosion that had killed 2 of her Marines and left her with permanent nerve damage was being dismissed as a minor inconvenience. The memories flooded back unbidden, the deafening blast, the screams of her wounded soldiers, the desperate race to get medical attention while her own blood pooled in the dirt. She took a deep breath and forced herself to continue walking. Engaging with these men would accomplish nothing except giving them more ammunition to use against her. She had learned long ago that some people's ignorance wasn't worth her energy, even when their words cut deep. But each step felt heavier now, weighted down not just by physical pain but by the sting of their disrespect. "Look at that, boys," the lieutenant's voice followed her. "Even walking away, she can barely keep up. Good thing the enemy can't run very fast, or the Marines might actually have to work for their victories." Maria's hands shook with suppressed fury, but she forced herself to keep moving. She had endured enemy fire, survived explosions, and carried wounded soldiers to safety. She would not let a group of arrogant SEALs break her spirit with their juvenile taunts. But the humiliation burned in her chest like acid, and she found herself blinking back tears of anger and frustration. The ceremony site came into view, and Maria focused on that goal. In less than an hour, she would stand before a group of young recruits and tell them about honor, courage, and sacrifice. She would share the stories of the Marines who didn't make it home, and she would inspire these new warriors to uphold the traditions of the Corps. These SEALs might not understand what true service meant, but she did, and that knowledge would have to be enough. Behind her, the laughter continued, but Maria blocked it out. She had speeches to give, Marines to honor, and a legacy to uphold. Whatever small-minded prejudices these men harbored were their problem, not hers. She was a United States Marine, and no amount of mockery could take that away from her. As she finally reached the ceremony area, Maria allowed herself one look back. The SEALs were still clustered together, probably moving on to their next target for ridicule. She shook her head and turned away, focusing on the task ahead. She had more important things to do than worry about the opinions of men who clearly had forgotten what respect and honor truly meant. The morning sun climbed higher in the sky, and the base continued its daily rhythm. But somewhere in the distance, other eyes had witnessed the encounter, and wheels were already beginning to turn. The SEALs had no idea that their morning entertainment would soon become their greatest regret. Unknown to them, Master Chief Petty Officer Jake Reaper Morrison had been watching from the shadows near the administrative building. Morrison was a legend in the SEAL community, a man who had served multiple tours and earned more commendations than most people could count. He was also someone who believed that honor and respect were not negotiable, regardless of branch rivalry. Morrison's jaw had tightened as he watched his fellow SEALs humiliate the wounded Marine. He had seen enough combat to recognize the 1,000-yard stare that sometimes flickered in the woman's eyes, the careful way she managed her pain, the pride that kept her walking despite obvious difficulty. This was a warrior who had paid a price for her service, and she deserved better than the juvenile behavior he had just witnessed. As Maria disappeared from view, Morrison stepped out of the shadows and began walking toward the group of SEALs. His expression was calm, but those who knew him would recognize the dangerous glint in his eyes. The lieutenant and his companions were about to receive an education in respect, military courtesy, and the consequences of dishonoring a fellow service member. The morning had started like any other, but, for these particular SEALs, it was about to become a day they would never forget. Morrison had built his reputation on two fundamental principles: protecting those who couldn't protect themselves and ensuring that actions had appropriate consequences. Today, he would demonstrate both principles with the precision and thoroughness that had made him a legend. Maria continued toward her destination, unaware that her morning encounter had set larger events in motion. She was focused on her duty, her speech, and the young Marines who needed to hear her words. But, behind her, the foundation was being laid for a reckoning that would remind everyone on the base what true military values look like when properly applied. Master Chief Morrison approached the group of SEALs with the measured pace of a predator sizing up its prey. His 23 years of service had taught him patience, but what he had just witnessed tested every fiber of his self-control. The lieutenant and his companions were still chuckling over their morning entertainment, completely unaware that their world was about to shift dramatically. "Gentlemen," Morrison's voice cut through their laughter like a blade through silk. The single word carried enough authority to stop all conversation immediately. The SEALs turned to face him, and Morrison watched recognition dawn in their eyes. Even the most arrogant officers knew better than to dismiss a Master Chief with his reputation. Lieutenant Derek Hammond straightened slightly, though his smirk remained.
Master Chief Morrison. Enjoying the morning show?
Morrison's expression didn't change, but the temperature around the group seemed to drop several degrees. I was actually trying to determine if I had somehow been transported back in time to a middle school playground. But, then, I remembered this is supposed to be a military installation populated by professional warriors.
Sergeant Tony Breslin, the stocky SEAL who had made several of the more cutting remarks, shifted uncomfortably. We were just having some fun, Master Chief. No harm done.
No harm done, Morrison repeated slowly, as if tasting the words and finding them bitter.
Tell me, Breslin, what do you know about that Marine you were just entertaining yourselves with?
The question caught the group off guard.
Hammond recovered first, his arrogance intact.
Some broken-down jarhead who can barely walk.
Probably looking for sympathy and special treatment.
Morrison nodded thoughtfully, then pulled out his phone and began scrolling through something. The SEALs watched nervously as he found what he was looking for and began reading aloud. Sergeant Maria Elena Rodriguez, United States Marine Corps.
2 tours in Afghanistan, 1 in Iraq. Bronze Star with V device for valor under fire.
Purple Heart for wounds received in action while leading a convoy security detail through an IED attack that killed 2 Marines and wounded 5 others. According to the citation, Sergeant Rodriguez continued to coordinate the medical evacuation and security response despite suffering severe injuries to her left leg and lower back. The silence that followed was deafening. Morrison continued reading, his voice carrying across the morning air with perfect clarity. During the attack, Sergeant Rodriguez exposed herself to continued enemy fire to drag 2 wounded Marines to safety. She maintained command and control of her unit for over 30 minutes while bleeding heavily from multiple wounds, refusing medical attention until all her Marines were accounted for. The citation notes that her actions directly saved the lives of 3 Marines who would have otherwise died in the kill zone.
Hammond's smirk had completely vanished.
The other SEALs looked at the ground, the walls, anywhere except Morrison's steady gaze. But the Master Chief wasn't finished. She's currently serving as an instructor at the Marine Corps Leadership Academy, where she teaches combat tactics and small unit leadership to new officers. Her students consistently rate her as one of the most effective instructors they've encountered.
Oh, and, gentlemen?
The reason she walks with a limp is because she has 17 pieces of shrapnel still embedded in her leg.
The doctors can't remove them without risking permanent paralysis.
Morrison pocketed his phone and stepped closer to the group. When he spoke again, his voice was quiet, but every word carried the weight of absolute authority. So please, explain to me again how this wounded warrior deserves your mockery and disrespect. The silence stretched on for what felt like hours. Finally, Hammond attempted to salvage the situation.
Master Chief, we didn't know about her background. You were just what, Lieutenant? Morrison's interruption was sharp as a whip crack. You were just assuming that someone's injuries made them less valuable? You were just demonstrating the kind of character that reflects poorly on every SEAL who has ever worn the trident?
Morrison began pacing slowly in front of the group, his hands clasped behind his back. It was a posture that every military person recognized as the prelude to a professional disaster.
Let me share something with you, gentlemen. Do you know how I know so much about Sergeant Rodriguez? Because I make it my business to know about warriors. Real warriors. The kind who put their lives on the line for others and pay prices they'll carry for the rest of their lives. He stopped pacing and fixed his gaze on Hammond. You see, Lieutenant, there's a difference between being elite and acting elite. Being elite means you've proven yourself through sacrifice, dedication, and service to something bigger than yourself. Acting elite means you stand around making fun of wounded veterans to make yourself feel superior. Morrison's voice grew harder. I've watched Marines, soldiers, sailors, and, yes, SEALs, give everything they had for this country. Some came home in boxes. Some came home in pieces. Some came home carrying invisible wounds that will never heal. But they all deserve better than to be mocked by people who should know better. Breslin tried to interject. Master Chief, we respect what she did. We were just no. Morrison's interruption was final. You don't get to claim respect while demonstrating the exact opposite. Respect isn't just a word you say when it's convenient.
It's how you act when you think no one important is watching. Morrison pulled out a notebook and pen, his movements deliberate and ominous.
Here's what's going to happen, gentlemen. You're all going to report to my office at 0800 tomorrow morning.
We're going to have a conversation about military values, professional conduct, and what it means to wear the uniform of the United States Navy.
Hammond's face flushed red.
Master Chief, with respect, you can't just. Morrison's smile was as cold as winter Arctic wind.
Lieutenant Hammond, I suggest you check my service record and current authority before you tell me what I can and cannot do.
I've been given considerable latitude to address issues of conduct and professionalism within the SEAL community.
Your behavior this morning has definitely qualified as such an issue.
He continued writing in his notebook, not looking up as he spoke.
I'm also going to be having conversations with your commanding officers about today's incident. Leadership tends to be very interested when their people demonstrate poor judgment in public forums.
The reality of their situation was beginning to dawn on the SEALs.
Morrison wasn't just any Master Chief.
He was connected to the highest levels of Naval Special Warfare Command, and his recommendations carried serious weight. A negative report from him could end careers or at least ensure that promotions became very difficult to obtain. Master Chief, Hammond tried again, his tone much more respectful.
Is there anything we can do to address this situation? We obviously made a mistake. Morrison finally looked up from his notebook.
You did indeed make a mistake, Lieutenant.
Several, actually.
You disrespected a wounded veteran. You brought shame to the SEAL community. And, most importantly, you demonstrated that your character doesn't match your reputation.
He closed the notebook with a sharp snap.
But, mistakes can sometimes be corrected if the people who made them are willing to put in the work.
We'll discuss that possibility tomorrow morning.
For now, I suggest you spend some time thinking about what kind of warriors you actually want to be. Morrison turned to walk away, then paused and looked back.
Oh, and, gentlemen? I'd recommend that you avoid any more public displays of poor judgment.
Word travels fast on a military base, and not everyone will be as patient with your behavior as I'm being today. As Morrison walked away, the SEALs stood in stunned silence. Their morning had gone from casual entertainment to potential career disaster in the span of 10 minutes. The reality of facing Morrison's judgment, along with the inevitable conversations with their commanding officers, was sinking in quickly. Hammond looked around at his companions, seeing his own worry reflected in their faces.
This is bad, he muttered.
Breslin nodded grimly.
Morrison's not someone you want as an enemy. And, after what we did.
He didn't finish the sentence, but everyone understood the implications. The third member of their group, Petty Officer First Class Mike Torres, spoke for the first time since Morrison's arrival.
Maybe we should find out more about this Marine.
If Morrison's right about her record.
He's right, Hammond said quietly. Morrison doesn't make things up, and he's got access to records we don't. Which means we just spent the morning making fun of a genuine war hero. The weight of their actions was settling on them like a heavy blanket.
They had crossed a line that shouldn't have been crossed, and now they were facing consequences that could follow them for the rest of their careers. The casual arrogance that had seemed so entertaining earlier now felt like the worst kind of foolishness. As the morning wore on and news of the incident began to spread through the base's informal communication networks, the SEALs would discover that Master Chief Morrison wasn't the only one who had witnessed their behavior. Other eyes had been watching, other people had been taking notes, and the ripple effects of their morning entertainment were just beginning to spread. Meanwhile, Maria Rodriguez was preparing for her speech, unaware that her painful walk across the base had triggered events that would ultimately vindicate her sacrifice and remind everyone present what true military professionalism looked like when properly applied. The stage was set for a reckoning that would resonate far beyond the immediate participants, and Master Chief Morrison was just getting started. By evening, word of the morning's incident had spread through the base like wildfire through dry timber. Master Chief Morrison had made several strategic phone calls, and the consequences were beginning to manifest in ways the offending SEALs could never have anticipated. What had started as a moment of casual cruelty was transforming into a base-wide education in respect, honor, and the true meaning of military brotherhood. Commander Sarah Chen, the base's executive officer, sat in her office reviewing the reports that had landed on her desk throughout the day. Morrison's initial incident report was thorough and damning, but it was just the beginning. 3 other personnel had come forward as witnesses, including a Marine colonel who had observed the entire encounter from the administrative building. Each account painted the same picture: a group of elite warriors behaving like schoolyard bullies toward a wounded veteran. Chen had served for 18 years and had seen her share of inter-service rivalry, but this crossed every line of professional conduct. She picked up her phone and dialed the number for Captain Robert Iron Mike Kowalski, commanding officer of the SEAL unit in question. The conversation that followed was brief and decisive. "Mike, we have a problem with some of your people," Chen began without preamble. "I'm sending you Morrison's report and the witness statements. Your boys picked the wrong Marine to mess with this morning." Captain Kowalski's reputation was built on maintaining discipline and professionalism within his unit. As he read through the reports Chen transmitted, his jaw tightened with each line. Hammond, Breslin, and Torres weren't just his subordinates, they were representatives of every SEAL who had ever served. Their behavior reflected on the entire community, and that was unacceptable. "Sarah, I'll handle this immediately," Kowalski said. "This kind of conduct doesn't represent what we stand for. These men are going to learn some hard lessons about honor and respect." But Chen had more in mind than standard disciplinary action. "Mike, I think this situation calls for something more comprehensive. Master Chief Morrison has suggested a solution that addresses both the immediate problem and the larger issue of military professionalism. Are you willing to trust his judgment on this?" Kowalski had worked with Morrison for 3 years and had never known the Master Chief to recommend anything that wasn't both effective and appropriate. "What does he have in mind?" Chen smiled grimly. "Something that will ensure these men never forget what they learned today. And, more importantly, something that will turn this negative incident into a positive learning experience for the entire base." Meanwhile, in her quarters, Maria Rodriguez was preparing her uniform for the next day's activities. The ceremony had gone well, her speech had been received with enthusiasm by the new recruits, and several officers had approached her afterward to express their appreciation for her service. She had managed to put the morning's unpleasant encounter behind her, focusing instead on the positive aspects of her day. A knock at her door interrupted her preparation. She opened it to find Master Chief Morrison standing in the hallway, his expression serious but respectful. "Sergeant Rodriguez, I hope I'm not disturbing you. I'm Master Chief Morrison from the SEAL community. I wondered if I could have a few minutes of your time." Maria invited him in, curious about what a senior SEAL might want to discuss with her. Morrison's reputation was well known throughout the military, and his request for a meeting was both surprising and intriguing. "Sergeant, I want to apologize for the behavior of some of my people this morning," Morrison began. "What happened to you is completely unacceptable, and I want you to know that it doesn't represent the values that the SEAL community actually stands for." Maria was taken aback. She had expected the morning's incident to disappear into the typical military bureaucracy, not to result in a personal visit from one of the most respected senior enlisted men in the Navy. "Master Chief, I appreciate your concern, but I've dealt with worse things than a few ignorant comments," Maria replied. "I don't want to cause problems for anyone." Morrison shook his head. "Sergeant, you're not causing problems. Those men caused problems when they chose to disrespect a wounded veteran. What I'm here to discuss is how we're going to ensure they understand the magnitude of their mistake." Over the next 30 minutes, Morrison outlined a plan that was both elegant and comprehensive. The 3 SEALs would indeed face disciplinary action, but, more importantly, they would undergo an intensive education in military values and the reality of combat service. The plan would also serve as a base-wide reminder of what true professionalism looked like. "I want you to know that this isn't about revenge, Sergeant," Morrison explained. It's about education, accountability, and making sure something positive comes out of a negative situation. These men need to understand not just what they did wrong, but what right looks like. Maria listened carefully as Morrison explained the details. The plan was thorough, fair, and designed to create lasting change rather than just temporary punishment. It would require her participation, but Morrison assured her that she would have full support from the command structure.
Master Chief, why is this so important to you? Maria asked.
I'm sure you have bigger issues to deal with than 3 idiots with bad attitudes. Morrison was quiet for a moment before responding.
Sergeant, I've spent over 2 decades in the military.
I've served with Marines, soldiers, sailors, and airmen. Some of the bravest people I've ever known have been wounded warriors who continue to serve despite paying a price that most people can't imagine. When I see someone mock that sacrifice, it cuts at the heart of everything we're supposed to stand for. He paused, then continued. But, more than that, I believe in accountability. Not just punishment, but real accountability where people learn from their mistakes and become better. These 3 men have the potential to be good SEALs, but they need to understand what that actually means. The next morning arrived with unseasonable clarity, as if the weather itself was preparing for the day's events. Hammond, Breslin, and Torres reported to Morrison's office at exactly 0800, each man carrying the weight of a sleepless night spent contemplating their careers and their choices. Morrison's office was spartanly decorated but filled with the artifacts of a long and distinguished career. Photos from various deployments lined one wall, commendations and certificates covered another, and a bookshelf filled with military history and leadership texts dominated the space behind his desk. The overall effect was one of competence, dedication, and hard-earned authority. "Gentlemen, please sit down," Morrison began, his tone professional but cold. "We have several things to discuss this morning, and I want to make sure we understand each other completely." The 3 SEALs took seats across from Morrison's desk, their usual confidence replaced by obvious apprehension. They had spent hours discussing possible outcomes, but none of them were prepared for what Morrison had actually planned.
"First, let's address the immediate issue," Morrison continued.
"Your behavior yesterday morning was unacceptable by any standard of military professionalism. You disrespected a wounded veteran, brought shame to your unit and your community, and demonstrated a fundamental misunderstanding of what it means to be an elite warrior." Hammond started to speak, but Morrison raised a hand to stop him. "You'll have opportunities to respond, Lieutenant, but first I want you to understand exactly what you did and why it matters."
Sergeant Rodriguez didn't just survive an IED attack.
She led her Marines through one of the most intense firefights of the war, saved multiple lives, and continued to serve despite injuries that would have ended most people's careers. Morrison activated his computer screen, which displayed a detailed map of Afghanistan with several areas highlighted in red. The attack that wounded Sergeant Rodriguez occurred during Operation Enduring Freedom, in an area where coalition forces faced daily contact with enemy fighters. Her convoy was specifically targeted because intelligence indicated they were transporting a high-value detainee. He clicked to the next slide, showing the tactical situation during the attack. The IED was followed by a coordinated ambush from 3 directions. Sergeant Rodriguez's vehicle was disabled, 2 Marines were killed instantly, and 3 others were severely wounded. Under heavy fire, she coordinated the response, called in medical evacuation, and personally carried wounded Marines to safety. The room was completely silent as Morrison continued his presentation. Each slide revealed another layer of the story, another detail that made their morning mockery seem more shameful and ignorant. For the next 6 hours, Sergeant Rodriguez held that position against repeated enemy attacks while waiting for reinforcement and medical support. She did this while bleeding from multiple wounds and dealing with what doctors later determined was a severe concussion. 3 Marines are alive today because of her actions that day. Morrison turned off the presentation and faced the 3 men directly. "So when you gentlemen decided to make jokes about her little scratch and her inability to walk properly, you were mocking someone who has demonstrated more courage, leadership, and sacrifice than most people will show in their entire lives." The weight of their ignorance settled on the SEALs like a physical force. They had made assumptions based on appearances, without knowing anything about the person they were targeting. The casual cruelty they had displayed now seemed not just unprofessional but actively shameful. "Master Chief," Hammond said quietly, "we had no idea about her background. We were completely wrong, and we're prepared to accept whatever consequences you deem appropriate." Morrison nodded. "I'm glad to hear that, Lieutenant, because the consequences are going to be comprehensive. You're going to learn not just about Sergeant Rodriguez's service, but about what real military professionalism looks like. And you're going to do it in a way that ensures this lesson stays with you for the rest of your careers." Master Chief Morrison opened a thick folder on his desk and distributed copies of several documents to the 3 SEALs. The papers contained detailed training schedules, reading assignments, and a comprehensive education plan that would span the next 30 days. "Gentlemen, you're about to embark on what I call the Warriors Education Program," Morrison began. "This isn't standard disciplinary action. This is an intensive course in military values, combat leadership, and the real meaning of elite service. By the time you're finished, you'll understand not just what you did wrong, but what right looks like." Hammond scanned the documents, his eyes widening as he absorbed the scope of what lay ahead. The program included daily meetings with wounded veterans from all branches of service, extensive reading assignments on military leadership and ethics, community service hours at the local VA hospital, and a final presentation to base leadership on military professionalism. Additionally, Morrison continued, "You'll be working directly with Sergeant Rodriguez over the next 2 weeks. She's agreed to share her expertise in combat leadership and tactical operations with you. You'll attend her classes, participate in her training exercises, and learn firsthand what real military excellence looks like." Breslin looked up from his papers, confusion evident on his face. "Master Chief, why would Sergeant Rodriguez agree to work with us after what we did?" Morrison's expression softened slightly. "Because, Petty Officer Breslin, she understands something you're about to learn. Military service isn't about personal grudges or wounded pride. It's about making each other better, regardless of past mistakes. She believes in redemption through education, and she's willing to invest her time in your improvement." The Master Chief stood and walked to his wall of photographs, stopping in front of a picture showing him with a group of Marines in Afghanistan. "I want you to understand something about elite warriors, gentlemen. Being elite isn't about looking down on others or proving your superiority through mockery. It's about lifting others up, protecting those who need protection, and demonstrating the highest standards of character and competence." He turned back to face them. "Sergeant Rodriguez exemplifies those standards. Over the next 2 weeks, you're going to see what that looks like in practice. You're going to witness the kind of leadership that inspires rather than intimidates, teaches rather than diminishes, and builds rather than destroys." Torres raised his hand tentatively. "Master Chief, what exactly will we be doing with Sergeant Rodriguez?" Morrison returned to his desk and pulled out another set of documents. "You'll start by attending her tactical leadership classes. These are courses she teaches to Marine officers on small unit operations, decision-making under pressure, and leading from the front. You'll participate as students, not observers." The implications were clear. These SEALs, who prided themselves on their elite status, would be taking basic leadership instruction from the Marine they had mocked. The irony wasn't lost on any of them. "You'll also assist with her physical training programs," Morrison continued. "Sergeant Rodriguez has developed adaptive fitness routines for wounded warriors returning to active duty. Despite her own limitations, she helps others overcome theirs. You'll see firsthand what dedication and service actually mean." Hammond shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Master Chief, we understand that we made a serious mistake. But isn't this somewhat unusual? Shouldn't we be facing more traditional disciplinary action?" Morrison's smile was cold as Arctic wind. "Lieutenant Hammond, you're facing disciplinary action from your chain of command. Captain Kowalski will be addressing that aspect of your behavior separately. What I'm offering is education. The question is whether you're smart enough to recognize the opportunity you're being given." He leaned forward, his hands flat on the desk. "Here's the reality, gentlemen. You have 2 choices. You can embrace this program, learn from your mistakes, and emerge as better SEALs and better men. Or you can resist, complain, and find yourselves facing more serious consequences.
The choice is entirely yours. Morrison pulled out a digital recorder and placed it on the desk.
Before we continue, I need each of you to acknowledge that you understand the program requirements and agree to participate fully. This isn't optional, but your attitude toward it is entirely under your control.
One by one, the 3 SEALs acknowledged their understanding and commitment to the program.
Their voices carried a mixture of resignation and growing curiosity about what they would actually learn during the coming weeks.
"Excellent," Morrison said, turning off the recorder. "Your first session with Sergeant Rodriguez is tomorrow at 0600.
You'll meet her at the Tactical Training Center, and you'll come prepared to learn. I suggest you review the reading assignments tonight and approach tomorrow with open minds."
As the SEALs filed out of Morrison's office, they carried with them a new understanding of the consequences of their actions.
What had seemed like harmless fun had triggered a comprehensive education in military values that would challenge everything they thought they knew about leadership and service.
That evening, Maria Rodriguez reviewed her lesson plans for the next day's class.
Morrison had explained the situation and asked for her participation in educating the 3 SEALs. Initially, she had been reluctant to spend time with the men who had mocked her, but Morrison's explanation of the program's goals had convinced her to participate. These men made a mistake, Morrison had told her. But they're still our people, and they still have the potential to be good warriors. What they need is education, not just punishment. And there's no one better qualified to teach them what real leadership looks like than someone who has demonstrated it under fire. Maria understood the logic, even if the personal cost felt high. Working with Hammond, Breslin, and Torres would be challenging, but it was also an opportunity to demonstrate the Marine Corps values that had guided her throughout her career. If she could turn their ignorance into understanding, their mockery into respect, then perhaps some good could come from the morning's painful encounter. She had designed tomorrow's class specifically with the 3 SEALs in mind. They would participate in scenario-based training that would challenge their assumptions about leadership, courage, and sacrifice. More importantly, they would begin to understand that true strength came not from tearing others down, but from building them up. The next morning arrived with the crisp clarity that often followed significant weather changes. Hammond, Breslin, and Torres arrived at the Tactical Training Center 15 minutes early, unsure of what to expect but determined to approach the day with the professionalism they should have demonstrated from the beginning. Maria was already there, reviewing equipment and preparing the training scenarios. When she saw the 3 SEALs approach,